Good morning, y'all. We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Excited to dive into a couple of different topics today. We're talking local recruiting. CSU Football recently offered a top 10 prospect for the state of Colorado for the 2026 cycle. We're going to talk about an intriguing transfer addition, Lloyd Avant, coming over from Tulsa. We're also going to talk a little bit of hoops. Have not locked in on hoops quite as much. It was obviously a slower start in non-conference play, but the Rams are figuring things out. They have an opportunity to start 4-1 in league play, which if they can do, sets themselves up pretty nicely. Now they've got a really challenging stretch coming up, going to Viejas and then Arena Auditorium, San Diego State and Wyoming in the same week. It's about as tough as it gets as far as a back-to-back road trip in the Mountain West. I guess you could throw like the Pit in there or something like that. But two of the bigger road challenges that CSU will have this season. Big, important game at home at Moby Saturday afternoon. We'll get into that in the second half of the show here. In this opening segment, I did want to give a couple of thoughts on the Orange Bowl. CFP semifinal part 1 was last night. Competitive game, which is really all you can ask for. Obviously, I've got the Von Miller jersey on. If you missed it, he is going to be on the Broncos show this morning, so make sure you guys check that out at some point. Preferably after my show. Didn't think I'd be going head-to-head with Vaughn, but I did enjoy the Orange Bowl last night. Notre Dame winning was not surprising to me, although the way it ended up playing out was potentially a little bit surprising. I just didn't understand Penn State's decision to put the ball in danger there. Certainly a poor decision from Drew Aller in the moment, throwing back across his body. I mean, a long throw. It never had a chance. Just a brutal way to lose. Notre Dame kicks the game-winning field goal. Kind of funny considering if you had followed college football closely all year, Notre Dame kicking had been a struggle. I believe Jeter missed like 5 of his first 6 kicks this season. Had been struggling with some groin issues. Came up clutch in this one. He's been really big for them the last couple of games now. That defense is legit. Heartbreaking if you're Penn State to go down that way. Kind of exactly what we expected for the first 3 quarters. Low scoring, both of those front sevens controlling. I mean, those are 2 of the better defensive front sevens in college football. That Notre Dame line especially is nasty. On the defensive side, I was really impressed that Penn State was able to get the kind of traction that they were able to on the ground. Not a lot of teams were able to run the ball on Notre Dame like that. I will say the quarterback play left a little bit to be desired in this one. I don't really know if there is an elite quarterback in the Final Four for the college football playoff right now. Some guys with some really high upside, some highly athletic, highly talented guys. Quinn Ewers can throw pretty football, don't get me wrong. And I've talked up what Will Howard has been doing for Ohio State here of late. He's a really dynamic guy as well. But it doesn't feel like there's that Trevor Lawrence or even like a Tua that is really elevating their team in a major way. I mean, Will Howard has played really, really well of late, but I was hoping to see a little bit more out of Riley Leonard and Drew Aller in this one. Both of them had some questionable decisions that led to turnovers. It was a shootout in the fourth quarter after 20 combined points through the first 3. You get 31 in the fourth quarter, ultimately end on a game-winning kick. I thought that Notre Dame just situationally played the game better. Didn't get too aggressive in a situation where they could have tried to make that field goal a little bit closer. Worst case, you miss it, you go to OT. But you don't put the ball in harm's way the way that Penn State did, which it kind of felt like just a classic Penn State loss. They're always right there knocking on the door. They're going to win 10, 11 games perennially, but there's seemingly always just a gap between them and that upper echelon of program. They're certainly a top 15 program in the country year in and year out, top 10 even most years, but it does feel like there's a gap that they just kind of haven't been able to get to, where there's a bridge they haven't been able to cross to get to that Ohio State level I mean, I think even Notre Dame, and it's funny just because, Brian Kelly leaves that program to go to LSU, supposedly to have a better shot at the playoff. And what Marcus Freeman has been able to do with Notre Dame has been really impressive. One of the better coaches in the game today. We've lost a lot of good coaches the last couple years. I think he's up there with the best of them. Hope tonight is another entertaining game. I think offensively, there's a potential for this to be pretty thrilling. I think these are the two best teams in the country in terms of talent. I will say that Notre Dame has been more consistent than Texas has. It feels like they get up big early in every game, and then they just kind of have these lulls. They let teams hang around. Their second half stats are not great for a team that won like 13 games. It's a little bit weird. I do feel like Ohio State has peaked at the right time. It just kind of feels like that Michigan loss was a reflection point for them. They've looked in the mirror, they've figured some things out, and they are just rolling on both sides of the ball. And the level of talent that they have, I mean, between their secondary and obviously at the receiver position, the backfield, it's hard to match up with. Now, if anybody is theoretically capable of going punch for punch with a team like Ohio State, I would think it's a team like Texas. They have had some running back injuries, I mean, early on in the year that kind of limited them there. Ewers has been hurt, kind of throughout his entire career, but it seems like he's never been 100% at really any point this season, at least since the non-conference slate. We'll see. I think it shapes up to be a really interesting game. Not sure I love having the first game be on a Thursday. I don't hate it. Having a game on a Friday is great. I would have probably preferred Friday, Saturday. I know they're trying to get optimal rest in between the semis and the final, but just kind of interesting. I think it's been really fun in the first year of this 12-team format. We've gotten some intriguing games. I don't think there's been any all-time thrillers or anything like that. Maybe we'll get one tonight. But I enjoyed watching the Orange Bowl. Big congrats to Notre Dame. Super impressive what they've been able to do this year, especially after that early season loss to Northern Illinois. And I just have found it really funny. I tweeted this morning. It's really funny how after schools like Ole Miss and Bama miss the playoff and their ADs come out and make these snarky comments about how they're going to have to reevaluate their scheduling process and essentially making comments like maybe we shouldn't be playing the group of five, then losing to the group of five isn't what kept them out of the playoff. Bama didn't make the playoff because they couldn't beat Oklahoma. Ole Miss lost a pair of head-to-head games in the SEC. Like, that's why you're not in the playoff. And the team that lost to a MAC school, Northern Illinois, in September is now playing for a national championship. I do feel like there's a little bit of poetic justice there. The SEC doing everything it can to kind of ruin what we as a whole love about college sports, trying to really separate from everybody else. But I just thought that was fitting, the way that it's played out, given some of those comments from Sankey and stuff throughout the year. I just thought it was funny. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the Orange Bowl. We're going to get into all the CSU stuff here. I talk about local recruiting, talk about a transfer edition, then we'll transition into hoops. Real quick, we are going to take a quick break, shout out a couple of our partners. Starting with a new one, we got to shout out Mando. Mando is awesome. It's a unique men's deodorant brand, a little bit different than what you're used to. It's focused on full body deodorant. It's not just for your pits. You put it on your belly, your balls, your butt crack, your grundle, all of that stuff. I don't even know what a grundle is, to be honest with you, but it says it in the copy. And if you put some Mando on your grundle, it's going to help with the scent. It was designed by a doctor. It's clinically proven to control odor better than just a shower with soap alone. 12 hours after a shower, the average man's grundle odor was a level 5 out of 10. With Mando, the average grundle odor is a level 0 out of 10. The math doesn't lie, people. Mando starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant. They've got really great scents. A lot of those deodorant brands out there, they're like lavender and stuff like that. They've got some neat ones here with Mando. They've got bourbon, leather, Cloverwoods, Mount Fuji, or Pro Sport. Lots of different options depending on what you're into. But like I said, that starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice like mini body wash and deodorant wipes after free shipping. As a special offer for listeners, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive offer that equates to over 40% off your starter pack. Use that code DNVR for shopmando.com. shopmando.com. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, and boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. Shout out Mando. That's a fun read. And they've actually sent us over some products, which are great. Love the deodorant wipes. Love everything about them. I also, though, got to shout out Coors Light. They've been with us for a long time. You know the drill. They encourage you to choose a chill mindset. A lot going on. I'm stressed about, this new work situation, just trying to balance covering hockey, covering college basketball, still staying locked in on the recruiting trail. Talked about that yesterday. It's a 365-day news cycle for college football these days. During those times, it's easy to get worked up. It's easy to not be the chillest guy. And I don't want to be like that. I want to have that chill state of mind. I want to be fun to be around. So that's what I got to do. I got to take my deep breaths, got to focus on the right things. Then when I'm kicked back, when I'm chilling, crack open an ice cold Coors Light while I'm watching college football. When the mountains turn blue, cold as the Rockies, cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smooth finish. Coors Light is mountain cold refreshment, crisp and refreshing as the Rockies. Oh my goodness. Crisp and refreshing as the Rockies. Choose chill this winter, then reach for Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with CoorsLight.com/DNVR, or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. Big shout out to Coors Light. Obviously, so much love for them. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat. Good morning to everybody rocking with us. I always appreciate the Rams community getting up nice and early with us, talking CSU. If you wouldn't mind giving us a thumbs up, I certainly would appreciate it. Helps with the algorithm, all that fun stuff. Let's get into it. Let's talk CSU football. Let's talk local recruiting, which is always a big talking point amongst Ram Nation. Always something we dissect. There's a lot of opinions on it. Usually people are pretty intense one way or the other in terms of CSU needs to get like 80% of their roster from Colorado. Other folks, CSU shouldn't recruit Colorado at all because there isn't that much talent that comes out of here. The truth, like most things, it's somewhere in the middle, and it can kind of vary from year to year. For instance, I've talked about how I don't personally view the 2025 class as a group that is going to have like double-digit contributors at the FBS level. There are a couple of guys that are kind of fringe that I think will, pan out, but it isn't the deepest cycle. 2026, on the other hand, and the staff has talked about this openly, that's a different conversation. You've got a couple of offensive linemen that are really intriguing, one of which locally from Fort Collins, Mason Bandhauer, recruited heavily by CSU. He's ultimately going to end up at Iowa State where his dad played. There's 3 or 4 O-linemen, though, this cycle that are going to be intriguing. A couple of really athletic and big tight ends, and that's what we're talking about today. Mason Bonner, 6'6", 200-pound tight end out of Mullen High School. Still growing into his frame. You can tell he's one of those guys that had a massive growth spurt. Still a little bit lanky, but man, he plays big out there. 33 catches for 617 yards and 8 touchdowns as a junior. That's on a Mullen offense that wasn't that dynamic. It's been really impressive to see what he's been able to do. Admittedly, I'm rooting for Mason Bonner in a major way. My mom was actually his preschool teacher way back in the day. He's the son of said Bonner, who used to coach at Bear Creek, has coached at Mullen. He does color commentary for a lot of college football. Great dude. One of the greatest arena football quarterbacks in history, actually, funny enough. And he's a big, strong dude to this day. So when I look at somebody like Mason Bonner, 6'6", 200 pounds right now, I mean, he's only going to get bigger and stronger. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if by the time he's like a sophomore, it's more like 6'6", 235, 240. Certainly appears like a guy that's going to translate at this level. He moves well. He's a 2-sport athlete, also plays basketball. And this is exactly the type of player you need to be recruiting heavily from Colorado. Like I said, people are very opinionated when it comes to local recruiting. I think you do need a local presence. I also think that if you focus too much of your energy on Colorado, it's not the wisest route given the amount of talent that you can pull from Southern California, from Arizona, from Texas. But I do think having that local presence is important, especially with guys like Mason Bonner. And while I have defended the staff's local recruiting approach as a whole, I think they generally recruit the right guys. I will say Mason Bonner is a guy that I personally feel like they should have offered earlier in the process. It's one thing when you're getting beat by like Charlotte or Washington State, smaller schools, it kind of makes sense. You shouldn't be getting beat by like Ohio State, those type of programs, Florida, on guys that are in your backyard. Now, they may ultimately end up in the Big Ten or the SEC anyways, but those players that are seemingly sure hits at the FBS level from the local recruiting scene, you've got to be first on guys like that. Like we should have offered him a year ago. And I get that it doesn't really matter. Like they can't sign at that point or anything like that. But I do think establishing those relationships, it matters. And, you know, the Mullen High School head coach, Jeremy Bennett's been pretty vocal. He went in the Denver Post and basically was like, CSU does not, you know, recruit our guys. We don't have much of a relationship with them. Again, I feel like some of the reactions to that can be a bit dramatic, and I think it lacks context because it really does matter from year to year. It's very different depending on what type of players are coming out. But Mason Bonner is the type of player that you should be landing. Aaron says, I don't think we should be getting best by Charlotte for Colorado kids. I'm not saying we should get beat by them. I'm just saying that like you shouldn't if Charlotte is recruiting a player and they don't have offers like Florida, Ohio State, Michigan, etc., they're probably a G4 or a G5 level prospect, and those guys are kind of fringe. And there's a couple of them this year. For instance, Jeremiah Hoffman, a receiver, intriguing guy, started at Severance, ultimately went to Cherry Creek. He's athletic, right on the verge of like, yeah, maybe an FBS starter, maybe not. He certainly runs well. When it's somebody that's going to be a 4 or a 5-star prospect, and I think Bonner, by the time it's said and done, is going to be a 4 or a 5-star prospect. He's a 3-star guy right now, still listed as top 10. Like those are the guys when you can see early on they have an opportunity to play at a high level. You need to offer them, and you need to have those relationships be well established, because that's really the only way you're going to be able to land a prospect like that. It's just when they have the option to go to USC, Ohio State, Florida, Alabama, those type of programs, it's tough sledding from a recruiting standpoint. And that's where hopefully, being in our backyard, having that well-established relationship, having those ties could potentially benefit you and help you land a kid like him. Now, based on the attention that he's receiving, based on the type of offers he's getting, I don't expect Mason Bonner to end up at CSU. But I do wish they would have been in on him a little bit earlier, because I think he is a guy that is going to translate in a major way. I think his ceiling is really high. You look at what his dad did. I mean, really talented player. Should have recruited him a little earlier. That's my opinion on Mason Bonner. Most of the time, I'm with the staff. I think they've been spot on offensive linemen, especially a lot of those guys. Unfortunately, I've ended up at Iowa State, and a couple guys have landed at like USC and schools like that. But you got to do what you can to land that top talent locally. And while there may not be 20 prospects that come out of Colorado every year that are going to be FBS starters, there are going to be a handful, and you do want to be in on the ones that are going to translate. So that's my thoughts on that. Again, really excited that they did offer him. I think it's important that they didn't come in super late in the process. There's still plenty of time to establish that relationship. But I mean, at this point, once you're already being recruited by Florida and schools like that, it's tough to compete. It is. Aaron wants to know, any chance that any of the new assistant coaches have stronger ties to the Colorado area? That is the only way I can see us moving the needle in state. That's a good question, and I've wondered about that. I do think that is something that has been lacking for a while now. Really, like Marty English was the last true coach on staff with just a ton of connections all around the state. They've had guys that recruit well. I think Bill Best recruits Colorado well, but none of these guys have those ties inherently, especially now that you can have so many guys on staff. Like I do think that is one role the staff could afford to add somebody, even if he's just like a consultant or something, just somebody that has ties around the state, that's known all these high school coaches. Because while the process can be a little bit petty at times, and I think really on both sides, both like CSU and CU turning their nose up at local recruits, and then those coaches being petty when the schools don't recruit their borderline players, I think it can result in the relationships being unnecessarily tense at times. But I do feel like CSU could use a guy on staff that has more local ties. I do think that would be an asset. Aaron also wants to know, also offer now, build a relationship with him if he goes to a big school and needs a rebound or feels homesick, then we can be there with open arms, also known as the Gabe Kershke path. Theoretically, that is what I would hope CSU football is able to do. I think that's one of the ways they actually can have some really dynamic local players is to be the landing spot for some of those top 10 guys that go out of state. Maybe it doesn't work out, they come back. The problem is while Gabe Kershke was supposed to be the blueprint, he came back, thrived, and then got right back in that portal and obviously went back to the P4. That's not quite as ideal. You don't want to be renting guys for a year at a time. But I do think, especially on the football side and soccer, where there's a lot of talent that comes out of this state on the women's soccer side, and they're going to go to bigger programs. They're going to go, play in the SEC, the ACC, some stuff like that. If it doesn't work out, come on back to Fort Collins and come back home. We'll be here with arms wide open. And I want to get into current recruiting. Talked about Mason Bonner, 2026 prospect. I also want to talk about the most recent commitment for the roster in 2025, and that is Tulsa transfer running back Lloyd Avant, 5'10", 196 pounds. He had 76 carries for 259 yards and a touchdown this past year. 3-star prospect, had a Summer Creek High School in Humble, Texas. Originally, CSU did offer him before he signed with Tulsa, as did UNLV, Memphis, Texas State, UCF. So he had some pretty big offers. A little surprising that he ended up at Tulsa. I do wonder if there was maybe a coach that was there that is no longer there, something like that. Got some playing time early on, obviously, but comes over to CSU, adds to what is now a pretty intriguing running back room between Justin Marshall, Jalen Dupree. You bring Van Shield back from UNC, although I'm not sure exactly how big his role is going to be. But you add a guy like Lloyd Avant, who I think can somewhat fill that Avery Morrow type role. He's maybe not quite as fast as Dupree or Marshall, but he's physical. There's not a lot of cuteness to his approach. It reminds me of like an old school running back in the 90s, early 2000s that would go for 1,000 yards in a Mike Shanahan system. He's patient. He's got great vision. Being 5'10", 200 pounds, he's thick. He's got good balance. But what I like about him is it's just not cute. He does a good job of making his read, putting his foot in the ground and getting uphill. It's not dancing around back there. He's not trying to do a bunch of cutbacks. He's patient between the tackles. But if you give him space, man, he hits that hole hard. And I think with no Avery Morrow in the mix, he can essentially be, that short yardage guy, your physical running back, red zone touches. Maybe he's not going to break free in the FBS level for some of the long runs you see in his high school huddle. Maybe he's getting run down on some of those. It's not like he's slow. I just don't know if he's quite as fast as Marshall or Dupree. But I do think that physicality, that ability to give him the ball, in 3rd and 3 when it's, or it's 4th and goal, something like that. He's a guy that's going to fall forward more times than not. And it's due to his approach. He runs low to the ground. It's physical. And like I said, just not a lot of cuteness there, which is something that I wish more running backs would embrace, to be honest. Like put your foot in the ground, get uphill, maybe drop the shoulder on somebody. A lot of defensive backs, especially if you can get past that first level, they aren't interested in trying to wrap you up, man. They don't want that contact. Run straight through them. You look at his production at the high school level, almost 4,000 yards between his junior and senior seasons, 57 rushing touchdowns, 7.2 yards per carry. Not quite Derrick Henry stats. His are basically mythical, but that's really impressive production. Reminds me a little bit of what we saw from Jalen Dupree coming out of Malvern, and I'm really high on Dupree. I think Dupree is going to be that lead guy next year, assuming that you hang on to him. I just think he's kind of the best of both worlds. He has some of that physicality. He's quick, his vision, and he goes out there and he makes plays. Like whenever he got touches, it seemed like good things happened. I'm excited about Lloyd Avant, though. I think he is filling a need that you still had in that backfield. And as much as I like Marshall and Dupree, at this point, I think we've pretty much seen what Marshall is, 10 to 15 carries a game, really going to be productive, can potentially get you to 100 yards on those 10 to 15 carries. More than that, he starts to wear down. We haven't really seen Dupree in an extended role yet based on how many touches he got in high school. I think he's got the motor for it, but it's a long season and guys wear down, and you're going to need 3, 4, even 5 running backs at various points throughout the year. Adding to that depth is crucial. The odds of hanging on to all 3 of those guys for multiple seasons in the modern era, probably not that high, because at some point somebody looks around and they think, I deserve more carries, or I want to fill a bigger role. And it kind of is what it is there. It's like quarterbacks when you sign 2, 3 within the same cycle or 2 cycles, that inevitably the majority of them are going to move on, because if one guy is killing it and one guy has established himself in that role, there just aren't going to be reps to give for anybody else. Guys don't stick around the way that they used to. I understand it. I'm just saying, the reality is you probably lose one of these backs down the line, but you feel really good about the running back room going into 2025. You feel good about the receiver room and the tight end room as well. I've said it a few times now, but I think the staff has done a really good job of filling those positions of need via the transfer portal. I think they're deeper at tight end. Jackson Warren getting healthy is a big part of that. And Lewis Brown electing to come back at receiver is just absolutely massive, given his familiarity with the system. Already has chemistry with BFN. Like, it's not like they're starting from, day one there. But I like what they've done. And I do think that they could use another offensive lineman or 2. I know they're in on the Ohio State kid, so maybe he'll ultimately be in the mix. We'll see what happens there. But intriguing commitment. I think they've done a good job. Still would like to see them add some depth in the trenches on both sides of the football, but I like what they've added at running back, like the skill positions. I think the secondary, they got bigger and more athletic. It's going to be a lot of new pieces that are going to need to gel together quickly, and that can be potentially problematic given you have not the easiest schedule. I mean, you don't play Texas, you don't have the Rocky Mountain Showdown, but you do get both Washington schools. So we'll see. We'll see how quickly they're able to hit the ground running, but I like what the staff has done this offseason. I think they've done a pretty good job. I know this hasn't been the most fun week for CSU fans, between Chad Savage going to USC and Chase Wilson ultimately entering the transfer portal. If you want my thoughts on that, go back and listen to yesterday's show. Not going to do that whole ramble again. But overall, I still think it's a net positive in terms of what's been gained, at least on the offensive side. The defensive side, there was already going to be a lot of turnover. I don't think losing Boomjock, Kershke, and Gatkuth objectively was great. All those guys, I think, have potentially high ceilings, so it's a bummer to lose them, but I like what they've done on the offensive side. And I like some of the talent they're bringing in, both via the portal and the high school ranks defensively. So I'm not panicking. Like I said yesterday, just breathe. The sky is not falling. I know sometimes it feels like it is. We're going to move on. We're going to talk basketball. If you got any questions, comments, etc., get them in the Toyota chat. We'll star them. We'll get to them at the end of the show. Might be a little bit shorter today. Probably not going to go the full hour. I do want to take a quick break real quick, though, and I'm going to shout out a couple more partners before we transition over to the hoop side. And we're going to start with Game Time. Nobody does it quite like Game Time. They're making it easier than ever to get great deals on all your favorite events. Sports, they've got it. Theater, they've got it. Stand-up comedy, boom, hit up Game Time. You're going to find the best prices in town. And what's great about Game Time, they're finding innovative ways constantly to make it easier on the consumer. With Game Time Picks, it's an awesome curation feature that filters out all the fluff and only shows you the best of the best. They've got the super deal. They've got the most flexible insurance policy in the ticket game based on like event cancellation protection, job loss protection, all that type of stuff. You can get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. You're not going to get hit with a million last minute fees. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account. Use that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem that code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I also want to talk to you guys about DNVR on your TV. A lot of you tune in to the live shows on YouTube. A lot of you listen on Spotify, Apple, Google. you'll always be able to. But if you're interested, if you have a smart TV, you can actually watch the DNVR podcasts on your smart TV, Samsung TV channel 2348, Comcast, it's 4072. We're on Zumo, we're on all kinds of stuff. Just say DNVR into the search function on your remote. We want to see you watching us on TV. If you happen to be tuned in, send us a picture. Send them to inthewild@thednvr.com. We'll be featuring submissions live on the show and picking lucky winners for some free DNVR merchandise. Again, check us out on channels on Samsung, Xfinity, or Zumo, and send us some pictures of you doing so. All right, like I said, we will get to these questions and comments at the end. Keep them coming. I'll answer as many questions as you guys have for us. I appreciate the support. So much love for everybody in Ram Nation rocking with us continually. Shout out and so much love to David Roddy as well. One of the first DNVR athletes. We were one of the first companies around to do NIL deals. The Denver Post, by the way, I think took credit for that. They were not the first. It was us with Roddy and Trey. Signed some of the first NIL deals in the state. He recently went over 1,000 points in the NBA in a little under 3 seasons. And it's safe to say at this point, David Roddy is a full-fledged NBA rotational player. He has found his footing in Atlanta, which is great to see. He was kind of in disastrous situations in Memphis and then Phoenix from just a drama standpoint. It had nothing to do with him. It just between the Ja Morant shit in Memphis and then you go to Phoenix and everything's been weird with the Suns for like 3 years. It just really was not a good spot. They were not focused on his development. I thought Memphis was going to be a good spot for him. It didn't pan out that way, but he's figured it out in Atlanta and he's not playing, a ton, but he's averaging 14.6 points per 36 minutes. He's 69% from the floor. He's 46% from deep. He's found his groove. And the fact that he scored 1,000 points in less than 3 seasons, I mean, that's not a cup of coffee in the league. I was curious, and I know they're so much different stylistically. Jason Smith was a true big, but Jay Smooth had 1,337 points in 11 years. D-Rod's at over 1,000 in less than 3 seasons. Has a really strong chance to ultimately be the all-time leading scorer in the NBA from CSU, which is really cool to see. I've just got so much love for him. One of the great dudes. Again, keep these questions coming. We'll get to them at the end. I'm going to talk hoops here, and then we will get into the wide receiver coach stuff. Alan Brown as the corners coach, all that stuff you guys are commenting about. I do want to talk CSU men's basketball, though, because while at this point their season really comes down to what happens in Vegas, they are 4-1 over their last 5. They're 3-1 to begin the league slate. They already have a couple of road wins. They're 1 league win away on the road from matching what they did all of last season. And they figured out their rotation here. They're finally able to play closer to what was envisioned in the offseason, which is Jalen Crocker-Johnson at the 4, Rashawn Bemba at the 5. Bemba dealing with some injuries early on in the year. He's got this hip issue that I think is just probably going to plague him his entire career. But he wasn't able to hit the ground running. Because of that, after learning the 4 in the offseason, Croc gets put at the 5. He has his moments where he does okay, but it's a completely different role. Now that they have him at the 4, Bemba at the 5, it's just really opened up things. And what's also been huge is, you look at the rotation, some of those guys are figuring out their roles. Like you brought Bowen Bourne and Keyshawn Williams in to be scorers. Now, been a little bit up and down for both of them. Bowen Bourne especially has been streaky. Williams has been a little bit more consistent. But those guys, they're coming off the bench. They're doing what they're supposed to do. They're putting the ball in the basket. And then you can lean on Ethan Morton in more of that like stretch 4 type role, because what he brings to the table defensively is so huge. But he was so inept offensively that in the starting lineup, it was hard, especially because you weren't getting a ton out of like Cayenne early on in the year. It was basically like Neek and Lake doing all the scoring, and that was about it. You didn't have that presence down low. With Bemba, the spacing was just all jacked up, and we've seen all of that open up here over the last couple of weeks. Morton, you can lean on his strengths defensively. You can let Keyshawn and Bowen, because those guys aren't elite defenders. There are going to be some times where people blow right past them. That's where you have Morton behind them to kind of help them out, send some help defense, protect the paint a little bit, get some boards. And you can let the rotation do what it's supposed to do, which is provide a scoring spark. You can lean on your starters in the key moments. We're seeing Kyan Evans really come into his own. He was awesome against Fresno State. 10 points, 100% from the floor. He had 7 assists, 4 rebounds. Like, he really is coming into his own right in front of our eyes and answering the call, which is something I talked about with Kevin Lytle yesterday on the audio only podcast, is that Kyan was in such a tough spot having to follow up Isaiah Stevens. It's a lot like trying to follow up Elway or Peyton Manning or Patrick Waugh in net. Like, it's just a recipe for disaster. Even if you're good, it's going to feel like a letdown because we've seen the position played at the highest level possible, essentially, at least for this level. Like, there aren't many point guards at the collegiate level that are as savvy or skilled as Isaiah. But Kyan is a guy who's really athletic. He can score at every level. I've always thought he's been really heady. Like, he hasn't tried to force the issue too much. Maybe at times, and Kevin mentioned this yesterday, was a little bit too passive, like should have been hunting his shot a little bit more. I like, though, that he didn't do that right off the bat, that he showed the maturity to play within the system, to, defend at a high level. He's already a better defender than Isaiah Stevens was. And now he's really starting to come into his own offensively. He's facilitating, he's hunting that 3-point shot, and he's hitting it with more consistency. So many things are going much better for CSU than what we saw early in the year. I mean, I think there was one point where Kyan, Keyshawn, and Bowen were all sub 20% from 3-point. And you knew that those numbers were going to normalize as the season went on. You knew that things would kind of steady as the guys gain their rapport and they figured out how to play together. And that's what we're seeing. They're locking down their rotation. They're kind of figuring out who's going to serve what role. And to their credit, guys are stepping up and making plays. And, defensively, what this team is doing right now, if you continue to defend like this, you're going to have an opportunity in every game. Like, there's no truly elite team in the Mountain West this year. There's some good, solid teams. San Diego State, really solid team. Utah State, solid team. Boise's got talent, although they've been up and down. They've probably been a disappointment so far. But you're going to have an opportunity here. And if you can win this game on Saturday against UNLV, you set yourself up at 4-1, which is a really good spot and almost the first third here of the conference slate. Now, you've got a really tough road trip coming up with San Diego State and Wyoming. So winning this one against UNLV is big. And then if you can even split, go 1 for 2 against San Diego State and Wyoming out on the road, I think you feel really great. If you win both of those, all of a sudden you're probably the favorite to win the league just based on remaining schedule and the fact that you'll have a lot of these top games at home. Down the stretch, you would have road wins over Nevada, San Diego State, and Wyoming at that point, which would be substantial, especially if you didn't blow things at home in some of these winnable games. But it starts with UNLV, and I hope they're able to continue sharing the ball like we've seen. That's what's been really encouraging to me, is that unlike early on in the year where it felt like if Neek and Lake didn't go for 45, they just didn't even have a chance to be competitive. It's been cool to see most games now, 4 or 5 guys flirting with double digits. Crocker Johnson, especially against Fresno State, was tremendous. I believe, let me pull it up. He had 20 points, 5 of 13 from the floor, but I loved his physicality. He's starting to knock down the 3 ball with more consistency as well. 4 of 7 from deep. Clifford does what he does, 14 points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists. But we're seeing everybody. Jorgensen had 10 points. Keyshawn had 18 points on 7 of 11 off the bench. The game kind of drug on because the officials were calling every little ticky-tack thing. I mean, CSU had 23 free throws. Fresno State had 33 free throws, so hopefully they're able to limit some of the foul trouble that they got into in that game, but I thought that was more about the ticky-tacky officiating than anything, both ways. It was just like, let's get out of here. This is a 30-point game, and for some reason it's going to take over 2 hours and like 15 minutes, something like that, a good 20 minutes longer than usual. Keep sharing the ball like you have. Keep getting this type of contribution from so many different sources, and you're going to be right there in the mix. And if you can finish in the top 5 in the Mountain West, get a first round bye in the Mountain West tournament, you've got a nice opportunity there to potentially make a little magic. You never know. It's really hard to win 3 games in 3 days. Haven't done it since 2003, but that just means they're due, right? Like, it would be cool to see CSU get in that way. I've always wanted to see them win the Mountain West tournament. I know it's maybe arguably a little bit fluky. But I also think there's some validity to it because when you look at the programs historically in the league that have most consistently been able to survive the gauntlet, it's been, like New Mexico at its peak. It's been San Diego State most years. And very clearly, like those have been the top hoops brands. I think that it would just be another feather in your cap or another step in the right direction in establishing the type of program that you're looking to build here under Nico Medved, which is something comparable to that of San Diego State. Now, I've talked a lot about how that takes a long time. It took well over a decade before Steve Fisher really got it close to what it is now. And honestly, Dutcher has kind of taken what Fisher established and really taken it to the next level. I know he had 1 or 2 years there with Kawhi where they were legitimate contenders, but I mean, Dutcher obviously took them to the national championship, but it wasn't something that happened in 3, 4, 5 years. I know the transfer process has changed things. You can potentially flip things a little bit faster, but it takes a while to create the type of program that we all envision, that we all hope CSU can be. But, like winning these types of games, finding a way to get to the NCAA tournament in a year where you don't necessarily have your A game all year, that's a sign of a great program. Like San Diego State has done that 3 or 4 times at least in the last 12 years where they go in and they have like a down year for them is still like 22 wins, but they're not, the San Diego State that we're used to. And then you look up at the end of the weekend and there they are, Mountain West tournament champs in the NCAA tournament. They find a way to grind it out. And I think there is a chance with a team or with the experience that CSU has on this team for the Rams to peak at the right moment. And, last year you can maybe argue they peaked in like December and we're kind of running on fumes by the end. I'd be intrigued, especially if they can continue to work things out within the rotation, continue to get the type of production they're getting across the board. I wonder if this is a CSU team that you don't want to face in the Mountain West tournament, especially 28 assists on 29 made field goals against Fresno State is incredible. Like you're not going to do that every night. But I've liked the mindset, and it does feel like they're figuring out how to play within Medved's system, which is, it's not the easiest. You've got to be able to pass. It's a lot of cutting, a lot of movement, and it takes a really good point guard and a really good passing 5, to be honest. And that's where having Bemba out there has been really big. A big game coming up against UNLV. Cannot let Deedon Thomas do to you what Bryce Hamilton used to do to CSU and what Isaiah Stevens used to do to UNLV. For whatever reason there, for about a half decade, it felt like sometimes both teams, but it felt like one team was going to have somebody go for 30 every single time that these teams played. And Deedon Thomas Jr. is good enough to beat you by himself. He almost beat San Diego State by himself in the Mountain West tournament. He's been one of my favorite watches in the league, going back to the beginning of last year. Obviously was the freshman player of the year in the Mountain West. He's one of those players, though, that when you see him in person, it's really impressive. Just the way that he moves, you can see how heady he is. He's thinking 2, 3 steps ahead. Reminds me a lot of Isaiah Stevens in that way, but he's really skilled, can get to the hoop. And right now he's 42% from the floor, 41% from deep. His shot attempts have gone way down in league play, and that kind of makes sense given the familiarity within the league. Mountain West teams have already seen him before. They're going to lock in on him defensively in a way that maybe is not going to happen in the non-conference slate, but you can't let him get going because he is the type of player like a Bryce Hamilton that can score 40 on you. And even if you played well, you're sitting there looking up at the end of it like, holy shit, how did we let this dude beat us basically by himself? From CSU standpoint, I don't think you're hoping for the Isaiah Stevens 35-point game. You're hoping to see more of what you saw against San Jose State and Fresno State. Defend at a high level, get multiple contributors offensively, get solid production off the bench. And this is a winnable game that can set you up in a really nice position going into the second half and then second third of your season here. But this is a big game. This is a big moment because this is a UNLV team that has top end talent, but they're inconsistent. And I think if you let them get some momentum early, you might be in kind of a rough spot. So I'm interested to see how CSU comes out of the gate, how they're able to defend. They've held back-to-back opponents sub 40% from the floor. You do that, you're going to have a good chance. But Deedon Thomas definitely scares me. All right. Before we get out of here, I am going to answer some of these questions and comments that you guys have been throwing in. Shout out to Riley behind the scenes who has starred them. Josh wants to know, they just announced Alan Brown as the cornerbacks coach. Seems like a solid hire. What's your initial impression? Yeah, I mean, he wasn't at Wazoo long enough to really get, a ton of information. Their secondary, they forced some turnovers. But I like his background coming over. He's worked in the SEC as well. It seems like the kind of guy that is going to pair well with the athletic corners that you've added via the portal. And I also like that they're going to have a dedicated safeties coach as well, because I just think that it's completely different roles. And it was kind of a weird spot. Like you had Marcus Patton the last couple of years as your DBs coach, but Freddie was also kind of the DBs coach. I like that these roles are a little bit more clearly defined, and ultimately we'll see. That I'm not surprised that they have changes in secondary, but I'm also excited that you're seemingly able to hang on to Pilipel and Chuka, the D-line coach. Jacob says, to me, the wide receiver coach position seems like a pretty attractive opening. Maybe it won't be as bad as it seems. So he lost Savage. At least I'm hoping. Yeah, I mean, I think there's talent in the room that you would want to work with. I mean, the greatest argument as a position coach in terms of selling yourself is being able to say, look at this all-conference receiver I had. Now, Torrey Horton is going to be an all-conference receiver no matter who his coach is. I maybe did not give Chad enough credit in terms of his on-field coaching yesterday. Kevin also mentioned that on the pod, and I thought that was a great point. We all fixate on the recruiting, and I think that's where you feel the biggest loss. But I think you can add a good receiver coach, and I do think it is an attractive role given the talent that you have, and given that you're seemingly going to open that offense back up and really lean on those passing targets out wide. It's ultimately going to make you look good. Position coaches matter, but I also think nothing makes a position coach look better than just having good players. Jacob also wants to know, going back to yesterday's show, you mentioned Mummy as a potential play caller and that he might have called plays during the 2023 Boise comeback. Do we know of any prior play calling from Mummy? Yeah, I mean, he was the head coach. I'm drawing a blank on the school, like a D2 level, before he went to Nevada with Norvell. So he has called plays before, and he might have called plays at one point early on for Norvell, and then Norvell took the reins. It was always kind of unclear to me on how that played out when they were in Reno. I've heard conflicting things, but I have been told from source that I trust that back during that Boise State comeback, it was Mummy that was calling the plays for BFN, and they have a really good relationship. I think he'd be able to maximize BFN, especially long term. You might argue it'd be good to get a new perspective in there, just given that these coaches have worked together for a long time, and like things can become stale. It's good, like in any industry, just to bring in a new perspective every now and then and shake things up. But I think his relationship within that QB room, he's tight with BFN and with Brousseau. I probably with the other QBs as well. I've just know specifically that he's tight with those two. I think it would be a good move, and I think Norvell trusts him. I think that's a big part of it. Like, especially if it's a situation like the administration is pressuring Norvell to add a play caller, you want to add somebody that you trust, right? Like, you don't want to necessarily bring in somebody from outside that might take all your shine and maybe steal your job or something like that down the line. That's all speculation on my part. But I have from multiple sources that I trust. It sounds like the plan is for CSU to add an offensive play caller. We'll see if that actually happens in the end. But at this point, I would be surprised if it doesn't, and I think we should find that out within the next week or so. We'll see. Aaron says, I want to see what we do against UNLV. It might be the best true test to see where we are thus far in conference play. I'm with you. I mean, Fresno and San Jose, they've been frisky against certain teams. They're not that good, though. This is a UNLV team that's been inconsistent, but the talent level is certainly superior from these teams that you've beaten so far. I think Nevada might be more well-rounded, but I think Deaton Thomas is better than anybody on Nevada. It's interesting to see. It's a big test for this team. I think if you win this one at home, particularly like convincingly, I'm not saying you win by 30 like you have the last couple of games, but could you win it by 8-10 or something like that? That would give me a lot of confidence going into a tough stretch, regardless of what happens in Viejas and Laramie, which in my opinion are probably the two toughest road trips you have to make for completely different reasons. Wyoming, the elevation, it's cold. There's not a lot of energy in there because it's kind of empty. It's not like playing in Fresno or San Jose, but it's not like going to the Pit or Viejas, which are certainly their own beast just due to the intensity and the passion and all that. And obviously you're playing a really good team in San Diego State. So that's all I've got for you guys this morning. Shout out to everybody in Ram Nation. Again, highly recommend you check out that Von Miller interview on the Broncos side that was airing simultaneously. Probably going to hurt my numbers, but it is cool to see Von coming on the DNVR Broncos pod. Kind of going to be a conflicting feeling this weekend watching the Broncos go up against him. Big game coming up against UNLV on Saturday. We'll have post-game coverage. Shout out to all of you. Much love, y'all. Proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.